We decided not to have a wedding in Korea. Here's why. Today is our wedding anniversary, but instead of going to a fancy hotel or an expensive restaurant, we came here because this place reminds us of something we're slowly starting to realize more and more about Korea, which is that weddings, they're not really about the bride and the groom. They're about family. If you got married in Korea, your wedding might last for less than an hour and hundreds of people might show up, but most of them barely know you. Sounds strange? It did to me too.
Every milestone, we try to support local business instead of going some fancy hotel or tourism spot.
This year we decided to come to Bonghwa, which is one of the most remote places in Korea. And here we're staying at a hanok, which brings me to the question that we get asked most often here in Korea, which is
Why we didn't have wedding in Korea?
And the answer to that is kind of complicated, but there are 4 big reasons. And I think by the end of this video, you'll be able to understand why we made that decision. It's hard to believe that it's already been another year together. And people ask us all the time, are you going to ever have a real wedding ceremony? And the answer is no. But to understand why, you have to understand what Korean weddings are actually like. Most weddings happen in a big, commercial, and often pretty tacky wedding hall. How it works is you usually have the hall for 1 hour, and during that time, all of your guests will come. Sometimes there won't be enough seats for them, so they'll just be standing. Everyone that you know, and not just that, everyone that you work with, everyone who your parents have ever known and worked with are expected to attend or to send money. And this can mean that weddings end up being pretty big and kind of impersonal. The weddings are kind of created like a factory line, and so there's not much personalization between different couples. So on a given day, in a wedding hall, there might be a wedding building that has 8 wedding halls, and in each wedding hall, there'll be 8 weddings in the day. So there'll be a brief ceremony, and where usually there'll be some sort of speech by someone of the parents of the bride and groom or a close friend. And then there'll be photos with everyone you've ever known, a big group photo of the wedding. And then after that, you leave the wedding hall and go to a buffet. There'll be not just the wedding party that you were just part of, but every wedding that's happening in the building at the same time, just all sprawled, sitting wherever. So sometimes you won't even see the friends that you know from the wedding again because it's too big. But I will say this for the factory wedding. It is cheap compared to Australia anyway. I know many Korean couples say that it's expensive, but compared to the absolutely astronomical cost of Australian weddings, it is very cheap and gets the job done. As I see it and understand it, Korean weddings are actually more of a wealth redistribution system, where the wealth is passed down from the older generations who typically have a bit more money than they actually need to live day to day, to the younger people who are just starting out their life and their family, and so they need the money more than the older generations. As far as I know, this kind of system has gone on for a long time in Korea. So you won't see any registry to give kitchenware and pots and pans and things like this. It's all about cash gifts. And actually, you must give a cash gift to get a ticket to the buffet to eat after the wedding ceremony. However, Australia is definitely moving more and more towards the cash gift side of things. And I think this just reflects the reality of living in Australia these days. The older generations prefer to give gift items, things like wine glasses and pots and pans. In Australia, the norm is for couples to live together for many, many years before getting married. And so there's no need to give brand new gift items like things to set up the house because they already have all those things. But at a Korean wedding, how much you're expected to give as a wedding gift, it depends on many things, but particularly about how close you are to the bride and groom. But an interesting side note is that in Roseman's grandparents' generation, the tradition was to give actual gifts, things to set up the home, which is similar to how the tradition was in my parents' generation in Australia. So I've seen some lovely wedding photos of Roseman's grandparents surrounded by all the gifts that they got for their wedding. This kind of system where gifts are given has completely shifted by the time Roseman's parents' generation came around. But here's the reason for this whole shift. Basically, for Roseman's parents' generation, they have spent their whole lives attending the weddings of friends and those friends' children. And at those weddings, they have given a lot of money. And kind of the expectation of this system is that then when those people get married or their children get married, then those people and their friends and family will all attend the wedding and give money to that couple. And so it kind of redistributes the wealth and comes out fair in the end. And that's why I think Korean weddings are attended by so many people. It's not uncommon. It's not uncommon in Korea to have a few hundred people at your wedding. Compare that to Australia, where most weddings are 50 to 100 people, maybe, if you can afford it, and they'll only be the close friends and family of the bride and groom. I think the logic between a Korean wedding and an Australian wedding is just completely different. And so our wedding cultures are just completely apart. But before I go on, just a quick shout out to the Rose Club members. Thank you for your support this month. Because of your support, this video is possible. So I guess this brings me to the last reason why we decided not to have a wedding in Korea. And it's just because we don't have the budget. Of course, we could have decided to not have one of those factory style weddings and plan our own celebration in our own way. But I guess there's also a massive cost there. The cost of an Australian wedding is just astronomical. And I think one of the other issues is that if we have a celebration here in Korea, my Australian family and friends won't all be able to make it. If we have a celebration in Australia, then not all of our Korean family and friends will be able to make it. And if we have a destination wedding somewhere else in the middle, well, because we both don't come from wealthy families, our families and friends wouldn't be able to make it either. And so we just decided to instead go and sign the paperwork here in Korea at like the local registry office and just spend the money on a lovely honeymoon, which we did last year. So I guess that's the answer why we didn't have a wedding.
Wait a second. I got a little more to say about that. Because when I think about wedding in my own family, it's actually pretty crazy how quickly things change. My grandparents' generation still had a traditional Korean wedding, no Western style ceremony, no white wedding dress, just a traditional way of getting married. Then one generation later, my parents had both. They had a Western style wedding, but they also kept traditional elements like pebek. And then you get to my generation, and almost none of traditional left. Pebek is now something you can choose to add to your wedding. And most couples simply don't. And traditional like ham are something I've only heard of. I've never actually seen one myself. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. We're not talking about something that disappeared hundreds of years ago. My grandfathers actually experienced this as a normal part of getting married. And within just 2 generations, it went from a normal part of Korean weddings to a traditional add-on to something most people age have never experienced at all. I think it's easy to understand why Korea changed incredibly quickly. People move from village into city. Communities become less close-knit, and wedding becomes more commercial and much more Western in style. Some of the old traditions also become impractical. Or in case of things like ham, sometimes went too far with the money demands and planks. So I'm not saying these traditions should come back, but I'm a little sad to realize that something my grandparents experienced as a completely normal has become history within just a couple of generations. And I think that's one of the strangest things about living in Korea. The biggest cultural changes aren't hundreds of years apart. They are just a couple of generations apart.
These days, Korean weddings are very Western in style. The bride and groom will wear Western dress and very rarely change into hanbok for the reception. Actually, we've been to many weddings and I've only ever seen one bride and groom do this. Usually only the mothers of the bride and groom will wear hanbok, which is Korean traditional dress. And sometimes older female family members will also wear hanbok, but this is optional. One tradition that is going strong still is the parents' meeting. So this is where the parents of the bride and groom will meet together before the wedding and discuss arrangements for the wedding. Usually it'll be held at a really nice restaurant where you can enjoy traditional Korean course menu. Being somewhere like this, surrounded by history, makes me wonder whether some of these traditions will survive for the next 50 years. That's actually a big part of why we're here today. Supporting traditional, smaller and lesser known places really matter to us. And part of the reason why we have this channel is we want to shine light on places that maybe don't always get so much interest on the internet. We want to use this channel to share Korean traditions while we're standing in the places that still hold them and while those places still exist and we still can. Everyone knows Seoul, everyone knows Busan, but most people don't know Bonghwa. But places like this is where Korea's traditions and culture still feel alive. If we only visit the famous spots, then these traditions and these smaller communities, they'll just quietly disappear. So we never had a big wedding, and we don't regret it, because instead of using the money on a big celebration that's less about us, instead we get to spend the money we would have spent on a wedding in places like this and shedding light on these kinds of communities, which is something that actually really matters to us. So we don't regret it, because now we get to spend our anniversary in places like this, which is something that really matters to us. So does your culture have some sort of wedding traditions that sound strange? Let me know in the comments. I read all of them. Thanks for watching. If stories like this resonate with you, then we'd love to see you in the next one, or maybe you'll consider subscribing. 오늘도 성공이에요. Why we chose each other to get married.
시원한 오미자차.
어머, 진짜요?
마시는 커피만 못하겠지만.
아니요, 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
오미자 좋아요.
들고 나온 것 같은데?
The host just came and brought us some orange
오, 불편한 물기에 있어요.
flavor.
예.
Black tea, yeah.
It's like sweet, sour.
이거 왔다 갔다 하니.
So that's what I'm missing while we do our video. Actually.